A group of bikers laughed while destroying the car of that humble black delivery woman, unaware that behind her silence, she hid the identity of a secret agent on a mission, and now the time had come to act. She parked her red sedan near a cracked sidewalk and stepped out, holding a small package. The car's paint was chipped around the edges, and the headlights flickered for a second before she switched them off. The street smelled like rotting food and motor oil. Low voices drifted from a distant alley. A few old street lamps buzzed overhead, casting weak light on damp concrete. She wore loose jeans, a cheap baseball cap, and a faded delivery vest. Her skin felt cold under the evening air, and her back ached from long hours behind the wheel. She checked her phone. The signal was weak. She opened the delivery app and confirmed the address. A beat-up brown door stood at the end of a narrow walkway. Cracked windows lined the building's front. She rubbed her hands together and exhaled. The agency had told her to blend in. She did as they said. Keep it low-key, keep moving, gather intel. She thought about calling them, but her phone sputtered with interference. She mumbled, "Come on, give me something." She tapped the screen. Nothing but static on the other end. She tried the agency's private line. No response. She looked around and noticed a figure behind a grimy window curtain. It moved away as soon as she glanced in its direction. She reached the trunk of her sedan and opened it. Inside were a few cardboard boxes. Each was empty, a prop to maintain her cover. She picked one up and checked the label. Fake sender, fake receiver. The agency insisted on details that made the disguise believable. She closed the trunk with a dull thud. Her eyes drifted to the far end of the block, where distant silhouettes hovered near parked motorcycles. They wore dark jackets, their shoulders broad, their voices low and rough. She knew who they were. Word on the street said they controlled these blocks. They rode in circles, intimidating small businesses, messing with anyone who looked vulnerable. She stepped onto the crumbling curb and headed toward the door. A woman leaned out of a second-floor window. The woman's eyes were narrowed, her face tense. "Hey," the delivery woman said quietly. "Do you know if the resident here placed an order?" The woman at the window shook her head. "No clue. Don't know nothing. Leave me alone." The window slammed shut. She sighed and knocked on the door. The wood felt damp. She waited, listening for footsteps inside. Nothing. She pressed her ear against the door. Silence. She knocked again, louder this time. No response. She stepped back and looked around, trying not to draw attention. The gang members were still distant, but she could hear muffled laughter. She spotted one of them leaning on a lamppost, watching her. He wore a leather jacket and tapped his boot on the pavement. She pretended not to notice. She flipped open her phone again, pressed the call button, and waited. Static, then a busy tone. She muttered under her breath, "Damn it!" She needed to confirm the drop-off, but no one answered. Her instructions were to keep trying, stay patient, and avoid confrontation. The agency had made it clear. Gather intel on the gang, identify their roots. She had managed to blend in so far. This was just another night, another fake delivery. She walked back to the car and rested a hand on the roof. The paint felt gritty under her fingertips. She glanced at a nearby apartment where a man sat on the stoop. He wore dirty jeans and a stained undershirt. He looked her up and down, then looked away. She tried to sound casual. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I'm trying to deliver a package. Do you know who lives at that address?" The man shrugged. "Why you asking me?" "I'm just trying to do my job," she said. "It's the last delivery tonight. I'd like to go home." He rubbed his neck and nodded toward the door. "No one good lives there. If no one answers, just leave." She frowned. She needed a sign of life, something to justify her presence. She tapped the side of her phone, considered taking a picture of the street, but decided against it. Too risky to look suspicious. The gang might notice her snapping photos. She looked again at the motorcycles parked under a flickering neon sign. 4 of them at least. Their mufflers were coated in grime. She heard one of them say, "This place is quiet tonight," and another reply, "Quiet means no trouble." Good. She tried not to stare. She focused on her car, checked the tires, looked at the trunk again. She noticed a scratch on the bumper that hadn't been there before. Maybe a past run-in with a pothole. She opened the driver's door and considered leaving, but she had not confirmed anything yet. The agency would want proof that she was there. She needed to show that she followed protocol. Inside the car, she took a deep breath and tried the phone line one more time. Still nothing. She felt sweat on her palms. She couldn't linger too long, but disappearing too soon might look suspicious. She stepped out again, locked the car, and approached the door once more. This time, she kicked the bottom corner lightly to see if that would stir a reaction. Still silence. A faint voice came from somewhere inside the building. She leaned closer, squinting at the cracks in the doorframe. She thought she heard someone say, "Who's that?" It was faint and unclear. She cleared her throat. "Delivery," she said loudly, hoping someone would at least respond. No answer followed. She glanced around, careful not to appear nervous. Her neck felt tight. She noticed the sound of distant laughter again. She turned slightly and saw two members of the gang walking toward the end of the block. They carried metal pipes, or maybe crowbars, and they seemed relaxed, chatting among themselves. She caught a few words. "Nobody messes around here," and "we keep things our way." She knew they controlled the area, but she had to stay calm. She stepped off the walkway and tried a different approach. She walked to the side of the building, hoping to find another entrance or maybe a window that wasn't sealed. She passed a pile of damp cardboard and an old sofa missing its cushions. She pressed her ear against a grimy side door, but only heard distant traffic. Then she returned to the front. The man on the stoop looked up at her again. She forced a small smile. "I guess they're not home," she said casually. He shrugged. "Yeah, guess so." She opened the trunk one more time, took the small package, and brought it back to the front door. She placed it carefully near the threshold. She pulled out a worn receipt slip from her vest pocket and scribbled a note that said, "Attempted delivery, no answer." She stuck it on top of the package. She snapped one quick photo with her phone as proof. She did it fast, shielding the screen from the street. She hoped the agency would accept that as evidence. She took a step back, scanned the area, and tried not to look too tense. Her heart beat a bit faster. She needed to leave soon. Standing too long in one spot would raise questions. The gang members didn't like strangers staying around after dark. She had done what she came to do: appear as a delivery driver, leave a package, record the situation, and try contacting the agency. Tomorrow, she would try another angle. For now, she would return to her rented room and wait for new instructions. She walked to her car and opened the driver's door. The seat creaked under her weight. She started the engine. It coughed twice and then settled into a low rumble. She checked her mirrors and saw no one approaching. She pulled away from the curb, leaving the quiet street behind. The building, the empty package, and the suspicious silence stayed where they were. The gang's laughter faded as she turned the corner. She tapped her phone again, hoping for a signal on the next block. She drove through dark streets with the windows up and the radio off. Her shoulders felt stiff, and her jaw ached from clenching her teeth. She had tried to deliver a package with no one answering, and the gang's presence in that neighborhood still worried her. She followed a winding route back to the small room she rented behind an old boarding house. The trip took longer than expected. She passed closed shops, a few tired faces behind dusty glass, and several corners where stray cats watched from under parked cars. When she reached the boarding house, she parked in a cramped space near a side wall. The old wooden structure smelled of mildew and cigarette smoke. A broken light above the entrance buzzed and flickered, sending weak shadows across the narrow alley. She got out, locked the sedan, and went around to the back door that led to her tiny room. The floorboards creaked as she entered the narrow hall. She nodded at a man who stood there smoking. He wore sweatpants and no shirt, his eyes half closed. He said, "Late night again, huh?" "Yeah," she replied. "Just deliveries." He shrugged and moved aside. She climbed a short flight of stairs to a door with peeling paint and turned the key. Inside, the air felt stale. A thin mattress lay on the floor, and a small desk stood in the corner. The walls had no decorations, and the single overhead bulb cast a harsh light. She sat down at the desk, pulled out her phone, and tried the agency line again. Nothing. She tossed the phone onto the desk and exhaled. She checked a small notebook where she kept coded notes. The mission demanded patience. She knew that the gang ran contraband through these streets. She needed to confirm their routes and timing. She had to remain invisible until the right moment. Tonight had been a disappointment, but she wouldn't give up. She peeled off her vest and tossed it onto the mattress. Her stomach growled. She opened a drawer and found a protein bar, chewing it slowly. She thought about the silence at that door, the empty package she left behind. Maybe tomorrow she would try another address. She had to keep the cover story believable. The agency had insisted that her presence blend in. Just another struggling delivery driver, always around but never important enough to notice. A muffled argument sounded through the thin wall. Her neighbor was shouting at someone over the phone. She tried to ignore it and pressed her ear against her own device again, hoping for a signal. Only static. She tapped on it and muttered, "Come on, pick up." No luck. She considered sending a short text through a secure channel, but she worried the gang might have ways of tracing signals. They controlled these blocks. Better to wait and try again later. Eventually, the shouting next door stopped, and she heard footsteps going downstairs. She stared at a single photograph taped inside a drawer. It showed a man she once partnered with. He had died on a mission years ago. She closed the drawer and cleared her throat. This was not the time to dwell on the past. She had to focus on the current mission. She rose from the chair and paced the small room. The floor felt uneven under her boots. She decided to call it a night and rest. Tomorrow she would try a different approach. Maybe she could talk to someone who ran a small market nearby, ask a few casual questions about the gang. She needed a lead, something to confirm the night's suspicions. The next morning, after a restless sleep, she woke up early. She washed her face in the shared bathroom at the end of the hall. The light there was dim and yellowish. She brushed her teeth quickly and returned to her room. She put on the same vest and cap, keeping her appearance consistent. She grabbed her keys, phone, and the small notebook. Her car looked even more worn in the morning light, the scratches and dents clearly visible. She pulled out onto a street that smelled of burnt coffee and damp paper. A corner store had just opened its doors, and the owner swept the sidewalk. She parked across the street and walked over. The owner glanced at her with mild curiosity. He wore a threadbare hoodie and had tattoos peeking out from the sleeves. "Morning," she said. "You get many delivery drivers around here?" He paused. "Sometimes. You're new?" "Yeah," she lied. "Just started this route. Tough area." He shrugged. "It is what it is. People mind their own business." She glanced at a poster peeling off a lamppost. "I heard some guys on bikes run things around here, that true?" He looked annoyed. "You don't want trouble. Just deliver your packages and go. Don't ask questions." She nodded slowly. "Yeah, makes sense. Just trying to figure out the best times to avoid. I don't want to bother anyone." He swept harder, not looking at her. "Don't get caught in their way. That's all I got." She thanked him and walked back to the car. She tried the phone again. Still nothing. She started the engine and eased into traffic. The next delivery was a few blocks away, a fake address the agency had set up. She followed the instructions, hoping someone would at least respond this time. She needed some kind of interaction to keep her cover and maybe pick up a clue. As she turned a corner, she spotted one of the bikers from last night leaning against a wall. He smoked a cigarette and scanned the street. She forced herself not to look twice. She kept her speed normal, her expression neutral. She parked a block away and walked the rest of the distance. This building was older, with cracked steps and a heavy metal door. She knocked twice. A voice inside yelled, "What do you want?" "Package delivery," she said loudly. "I have something for apartment 3. "Leave it outside," the voice replied. She sighed and placed the small box on the step. "I need a signature," she said. "Company policy." Not opening the door, the voice said. "You want a signature? You're out of luck." She considered insisting, but decided not to push it. She took out her phone and snapped a quick photo. The voice inside yelled, "No pictures." "I have to show I tried," she said calmly. "Otherwise, they think I didn't do my job." "Whatever," the voice replied. She heard something heavy shift inside. She took a step back and noticed a second-floor window open slightly. A face appeared for a moment, then vanished. She walked away, pretending to adjust her cap. Another failed interaction, but at least there was some response this time. She returned to the car and tapped the steering wheel. She needed a better plan. Without direct contact from the agency, she felt blind. She started the car and drove slowly, checking her mirrors. No one seemed to follow her. She spotted a payphone near a small diner. She parked nearby, got out, and crossed the street. The payphone smelled of old beer, and the receiver was sticky. She wiped it with her sleeve and inserted some coins. She tried a number linked to the agency's backup line. It rang once, then twice, and then clicked. A muffled voice said, "Yes?" She kept her voice low. "No confirmation last night. Area is tense. Gangs active." The voice replied, "Proceed as planned. Need intel on their main route. Deadline approaching." She glanced around. No sign of a clear route yet. They watch everything. Hard to get inside. The voice said, "Try harder. Failure is not an option." The line went dead. She hung up and rubbed her eyes. At least now she had instructions. She needed to get closer to the gang's activities. She got back in the car and took a long route through side streets, looking for any patterns. She noticed a few warehouses near the edge of the neighborhood. A couple of men in black jackets unloaded boxes from a truck, though she couldn't confirm if they were linked to the gang. She drove by slowly. One of the men shouted, "Hey, you lost?" She shook her head and raised a hand. "Delivery driver, just trying to find the right address." He laughed. "Wrong place, lady. Keep moving." She nodded and kept going. She marked the warehouse location in her notebook with a simple code. Back in her cramped room that afternoon, she reviewed her notes. Still too vague. She needed specific evidence. She tapped her phone again, hoping for a stable connection. It barely worked. She planned to stake out one of these warehouses tonight. She would park her sedan behind some dumpsters and watch who came and went. If she could capture a few clear images with her phone's camera and maybe overhear some conversations, she might finally get a lead. As daylight faded, she left the boarding house, trying to look tired and uninterested. She reached the chosen warehouse and found a spot a short distance away. It smelled like garbage, and rats scurried under discarded crates. She turned off the engine, lowered her seat, and waited. If the gang moved contraband, they would likely do it after dark. She kept one hand on her phone, ready to take pictures. This time, she would not leave empty-handed. She waited in the driver's seat, engine off, phone in hand. The area was quiet except for distant traffic. A few dim lights shone around the warehouse entrance. She saw two men in dark jackets moving boxes inside. They worked with quick, silent efficiency. She pressed the record button on her phone's camera, keeping the lens low near the dashboard. The images were grainy, but they might help later. She zoomed in on a truck parked at the side. Its license plate was covered in dirt. She tried to make out some numbers, but it was too dark. She tapped the side of the phone, frustrated. A noise on her left made her flinch. She looked up and saw a shape move behind a stack of wooden pallets. She turned off the camera and lowered herself in the seat. Her heart thumped. She heard footsteps and quiet, muffled voices. She couldn't see who it was. She thought about starting the car and leaving, but that would draw attention. She stayed still. After a minute, the footsteps faded. She slowly raised her head and glanced around. The men with the boxes were gone. The truck's engine started. She kept still, watching from behind the cracked windshield. The truck pulled out and drove away without lights. She tried to note its direction. It turned left at the next intersection. She grabbed her notebook and wrote a quick line. Truck left warehouse at approx midnight heading south. She leaned back and sighed. She needed more solid evidence. Just a truck and a couple of men moving boxes wasn't enough. The agency expected details about the gang's main route. She could not confirm anything yet. Maybe if she followed the truck, but she had arrived too late. She turned the key in the ignition, careful not to rev too loudly. The engine struggled. She cursed under her breath. The sedan's condition worsened every day. She tried again. On the third attempt, the engine caught but made a grinding noise. She winced and shifted into gear. Suddenly, headlights flashed behind her. A motorbike roared past, then another. She hunched down, trying to blend in. The bikes circled the block, their engines rumbling. She thought about leaving, but now it was risky. If they saw her, they might follow. She waited, hoping they would lose interest. A loud voice cut through the darkness. "Hey, who's in that car?" She froze. She peered into the rearview mirror. 3 bikers approached from behind, headlights shining into her back window. She squinted, trying to appear harmless. She rolled down the window a crack. "Just a delivery driver," she called out. "I got lost, that's all. I'm leaving now." Her voice sounded steady, but her stomach churned. A biker laughed. "You don't belong here at this hour. Show yourself." She hesitated, then pushed the door open and stepped out, keeping her hands visible. She wore her vest and cap. She tried a nervous smile. "Sorry, I just took a wrong turn. I'll be on my way." Another biker circled her car, tapping the metal frame with a gloved hand. "This car's seen better days," he said, grinning. "What's in the trunk?" "Just delivery boxes," she said. "They're empty. I was supposed to drop them off, but the address was wrong." She lifted her hand slightly. "I'll go now, okay?" The first biker took a step closer. He smelled like sweat and engine grease. "Not so fast," he said. "You've been sitting here a while. What were you watching?" She swallowed. "I told you I got lost. I was checking my phone for directions." She patted her vest. "Look, I have the delivery app right here." He snorted. "Give me the phone." She hesitated. Handing over the phone could reveal something, but refusing would be worse. She pulled it out slowly. "Here," she said. "Just be careful. It's an old model." He grabbed it and stepped back. He pressed a few buttons. She prayed he wouldn't find the footage. He frowned. "No signal?" She shrugged. "This neighborhood's got a weak signal. Happens all the time." He tossed the phone onto the hood of the car. "No messages? Nothing. Useless." He nodded at the others. "Check the trunk." She stiffened. "Hey, you can't just—" Before she could finish, one of the other bikers popped the trunk. Empty boxes tumbled out. He kicked them aside. "She's telling the truth. Nothing inside." The first biker gave a harsh laugh. "Then what's your game, lady? We don't like people hanging around." She forced a weak chuckle. "No game. I'm low on gas, trying to figure out where the next open station is. That's it." They closed in. One of them tapped her shoulder hard, making her step back. Another slid a hand along the car's side panel. He took out a small knife and scratched the paint. She tried to keep calm. "Please don't do that. This car's all I've got." He snickered. "Then you're pretty much screwed, aren't you?" He slammed his fist on the hood. The sound echoed. The others laughed. One of them hopped onto the trunk and bounced, denting the metal. Her jaw tightened. She clenched her fists but said nothing. They circled her like a pack of dogs. She felt their eyes on her. Another punch landed on the passenger door, denting it further. A window shattered, spraying glass inside. She flinched, arms raised to protect her face. The laughter got louder. They slashed a tire, the air hissing out. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. "Stop," she finally said, trying to sound weak but desperate. She had to maintain the cover. "Please, I'll leave. Just let me go." She looked down, pretending submission. One of the bikers grabbed her phone off the hood and dropped it on the ground. He stomped on it, crushing it to pieces. "No calls for help," he said. "Not here." She fought the urge to fight back. She had training, but if she revealed it, she could blow her entire mission. She needed evidence, and she needed to remain a nobody for now. She gritted her teeth as they continued to vandalize the car. Another window cracked. The hood was scratched. The trunk's latch snapped. They kicked the bumpers until they hung loose. She stood by, pretending fear and helplessness. Inside, she boiled with anger. This was her only cover vehicle, and now it was a wreck. She knew the agency wouldn't reimburse her. She had to adapt, find a way to continue the mission despite this setback. After a few minutes, one of them shoved her against the wall. "Get out of here," he said. "We see you again, it'll be worse." They turned and mounted their bikes. Engines roared, and then they vanished into the night. She leaned on the battered car, breathing hard. Shards of glass crunched under her boots. The air stank of burnt rubber and fear. She pushed aside a piece of bent metal and opened the driver's door. The seat was covered in broken glass. She swept it off as best she could and tried the engine. It sputtered. With a flat tire and smashed windows, it was barely drivable. Still, she had to move. She would not stay in that alley with no way out. She managed to start the engine, though it made horrible noises. She inched forward, limping on the damaged wheel. She needed to find a safer place to park, maybe a side street, and then figure out her next steps. Her phone was gone, her cover almost blown, and she had no direct way to contact the agency. This was a disaster. She kept driving slowly, every bump sending pain through her shoulders. She thought about the mission's goals: gather intel on the gang's routes, confirm their operations, then deliver the evidence. Now she had no phone, no immediate plan, and a smashed car. She tasted blood on her lip, must have cut herself on the glass. She wiped it with her sleeve and stayed focused on the road ahead. Soon she found a deserted spot under a broken streetlight. She parked and turned off the engine. She sat there, breathing, trying to control her panic. She had to think of a new strategy. The agency would not wait forever. If she failed to deliver results, they would cut her loose. She could not let that happen. She might have lost one night's worth of evidence, but she still had her training and her mind. She stared at the shattered windshield and clenched her jaw. She would find another way, even if it meant putting herself at greater risk. For now, she needed rest. Tomorrow, she would start again. She sat inside the wrecked sedan and took shallow breaths. The street remained silent, no sign of the gang. The windshield had a large crack, and broken glass covered the dashboard. She brushed it off and tried to straighten the rearview mirror. The tire was flat and the car leaned to one side. She tried the phone out of habit, forgetting it was destroyed. All she saw now was the dented hood and a ruined cover story. If anyone passed by, they would see a delivery driver in trouble, not the calm infiltrator she was supposed to be. She looked around for a payphone or a sign of life. Nothing but dark walls and closed doors. She knew she had to move. She turned the key. The engine sputtered, then caught. The car dragged forward, making a scraping sound. She drove slowly, staying in the shadows. The night air felt cold against her face through the broken window. She had no backup and no one waiting for her call. The agency line had been busy before. Maybe now it would work. A few blocks later, she spotted a phone booth near a deserted lot. The glass panels were cracked, and someone had tagged the exterior with sloppy paint. She parked the sedan awkwardly at the curb and got out, careful not to slice her hands on the broken door frame. The payphone smelled like old cigarettes and stale beer. She reached into her pocket for loose change. A car passed by at the far end of the street. She froze, watching its taillights vanish. Then she picked up the receiver and dialed the agency's backup number. She listened. Static. A busy tone. She tried again. This time the line rang twice and then went silent. She cursed under her breath and slammed the receiver down. She climbed back into the sedan and tried to think. She needed help, but no one was available. She needed a place to rest and think. The boarding house room would have to do. She drove slowly, staying off main roads. She avoided areas where the gang might patrol. Each bump sent a jolt through her muscles. Her lip hurt, and she guessed it was still bleeding. When she reached the boarding house, the side alley was empty. She parked behind a dumpster and checked that no one watched. She limped up the stairs, keeping her head down. She unlocked her door and slipped inside. The room smelled damp as always, and the single bulb flickered. She tried the agency line on the room's old landline phone. The connection hissed, then clicked. Still nothing useful. She dropped onto the mattress and stared at the ceiling. Her car was wrecked, Her phone smashed, and she had no proof to show the agency. She had spent weeks trying to blend in, only to get caught by a gang patrol. The mission demanded evidence of their smuggling route, and time was running out. She considered calling it quits, leaving the city. She didn't want to die here. Footsteps sounded outside her door. She tensed and waited. Someone knocked lightly. She got up and opened it a crack. It was the shirtless man from before, the one who had stood in the hall smoking. "You look like you got into a fight," he said. He glanced at her busted lip and dirty clothes. "It's nothing," she said. "Car trouble. Some thugs messed with me." He shook his head. "You never say much about yourself. People here don't trust outsiders." She lowered her voice. "I keep to myself. It's safer that way." He snorted. "Suit yourself." He turned to leave, then paused. "I saw your car. That's a mess. You should get out of this neighborhood if you know what's good for you." She watched him go. So much for neighbors offering sympathy. He probably thought she was arrogant or hiding something. Maybe he would tell others that she was suspicious. She closed the door and leaned against it. She wanted to at least send a message to the agency. She rummaged through a small bag in the corner and found a basic radio transmitter they had given her. It was primitive, but maybe she could reach someone if they were monitoring the frequency. She set it up on the desk, adjusting a small antenna. She pressed the transmit button. "This is the driver," she said softly. "Car damaged. No contact. Need instructions." She released the button and waited. Nothing but static. She tried again. "I have no phone. Situation compromised." After a moment of silence, a faint reply crackled through. "Tonight's the last chance. Target warehouse at midnight. We need details." She clenched her jaw. The agency wanted results, and they wanted them now. She had nothing solid yet, and the car was barely drivable. She would have to improvise. She sat down and wrote down what she knew. The gang had warehouses, they controlled certain blocks, and they moved items at night. She had seen a truck leaving one location, but hadn't caught enough details. She needed a better plan. She looked in the mirror above the desk. A faint reflection of her tired eyes stared back. She was supposed to be undercover, but now she looked like a victim. The mission required action, not waiting. The thought of going back out there, limping along in a ruined car, made her stomach clench. She reminded herself that the agency expected more. If she didn't deliver, they would pull her out and leave this place as it was. Gang still in control. She tried the agency line one more time through the transmitter. A burst of static, then a voice. "Documents transferring tonight. Catch them in the act. Confirm identities and method." The signal cut out. She gripped the desk and nodded to herself. So that was it. Some kind of exchange would happen tonight. She would have to witness it and record what she could. The weight of that responsibility pressed on her. She needed at least a running vehicle. She headed downstairs to check the damage again. The building's hallway was empty now. Outside, the alley was quiet. She examined the sedan with a flashlight. 2 windows gone, 1 tire flat, a bent bumper. She opened the trunk. Some tools were inside. A cheap jack, a spare tire with a slow leak, and a roll of duct tape. She grabbed them and set to work, changing the tire and taping the bumper so it wouldn't drag. She cleared most of the broken glass from the seats. It was crude, but it would get her moving again. While she worked, she heard a distant rumble of motorcycle engines. She froze, holding her breath, until the sound faded. She finished up and slipped back inside the boarding house. Her neck hurt, and her hands shook, but she had a working car again. Barely. In the quiet of her room, she tried the transmitter once more. No response. Maybe the agency had given all the instructions they could. She remembered the gang's threats. Disappear or face consequences. She wouldn't disappear. She would go to that warehouse tonight. She would stay hidden and get the evidence needed. The risk was high, but she had no choice. She looked at the cracked mirror on the desk again. This time, no hesitation. She would do what she had trained for. No excuses. The neighbors' warnings, the gang's violence, and the silence from the agency wouldn't stop her. She had a mission. She had to prove she could finish it. She checked her watch. She had a few hours until midnight. She'd rest, keep quiet, and move out before the streets got busy with night patrols. She turned off the light and lay down on the mattress. Her back ached, and her lips still stung, but her mind focused on the task ahead. She woke up a couple of hours before midnight, washed her face in the shared bathroom, and returned to her room. She put on the same vest and cap, trying to look like the same delivery driver. The swelling on her lip had gone down slightly, but it still hurt to touch. She ignored the pain and checked her improvised notes. She had to reach the warehouse early, find a hiding spot, and watch the exchange. This time, she would keep the car out of sight and rely on her own eyes and ears. Outside, the night air felt heavy. She got into the damaged sedan and started the engine. It rattled, but at least it moved. She drove with no lights for a few blocks, relying on the dim glow of distant street lamps. She didn't want to announce her arrival to anyone who might be watching. Her plan was simple: park a safe distance from the warehouse and approach on foot. After several turns, she recognized the area from the previous night. The warehouse looked quiet from a distance. She parked behind a stack of discarded tires and turned off the engine. She got out, locked the door, and crept along a row of parked cars. The pavement felt rough under her boots. She stayed low, sticking close to walls and fences. She reached a spot behind a metal dumpster that offered a partial view of the warehouse entrance. It smelled bad, but she ignored it and focused on the scene ahead. A single light shone above the warehouse door. She saw a pair of men leaning against the wall, smoking and murmuring to each other. She strained to listen, but couldn't catch their words. Time passed slowly. A distant siren wailed and faded. She shifted her weight, trying not to make noise. After a few minutes, a black sedan pulled up. Its headlights were off. The two men straightened and approached the car. She saw one of them open the passenger door and say something to whoever sat inside. She couldn't see faces clearly, but she recognized the tone, tense and direct. She crouched lower and wished she had her phone. Without it, she couldn't take pictures. She still had the small camera installed in her car's dashboard, but that was too far away. She decided to inch closer. She pressed her back against a low concrete barrier and moved one step at a time until she reached a corner near the warehouse's loading bay. The black sedan's driver got out, adjusting his jacket. He had a thick build and a shaved head. He said, "You got the documents?" One of the warehouse men nodded. "Inside. Payment first." The driver snorted. "I want to see the goods." The other man shrugged. "No free previews." She leaned forward, holding her breath. These documents were what the agency wanted. Proof of the gang's operations. She just needed to confirm the route or the nature of the contraband. She heard the sound of footsteps on metal stairs. Someone else appeared from a side door. This new arrival said, "Relax, we have everything, but we do it our way. Money, then documents." The driver sighed. "Fine." He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. He tossed it to the men. One caught it and flipped through the bills under the dim light. The first warehouse man nodded. "Looks good. Wait here." He disappeared inside. She waited, heart pounding. If the exchange took place inside, she might get nothing out here. She considered moving closer, maybe slipping through the side of the building, but that risked exposure. She glanced around and noticed a small window partially open. It was too high to reach quietly, but maybe if she found a crate or something to stand on. She crept around the corner, careful not to scrape her boots on the ground. She found an old wooden pallet leaning against a chain-link fence. She dragged it slowly, holding her breath whenever the men outside spoke. They seemed too busy counting money and checking the perimeter to notice. She set the pallet under the window and climbed up, pressing her face close to the opening. Through the narrow gap, she could see dim overhead lights and stacks of boxes. A man stood at a metal table, shuffling papers. He wore gloves and handled the documents with care. She listened closely. He muttered to himself, "Route A to the border, Route B through the docks, Next shipment next Tuesday. He paused and tapped a page. That's the one. He rolled a few papers and tucked them into a tube. He stepped away from the table, moving toward the door. She smiled to herself. This was it. Actual confirmation of their smuggling operation. She tried to memorize what he said. Border, docks, next Tuesday. She needed more details. She leaned in further. The window's frame creaked. She froze, waiting. The man inside didn't react. He must not have heard. He opened the door and stepped out, handing the tube to the man outside. She heard him say, "That's all you need. Don't lose it." The driver took the tube and nodded. "We're good here?" "Yeah," said the warehouse man. "Get out before someone sees you." The driver laughed. "No worries. The neighborhood's dead at this hour." She bit her lip. They would leave soon. She needed something more concrete. She couldn't snap a photo, but maybe she could follow the black sedan. The route might lead her to a bigger stash, but her own car was parked too far. By the time she got back and started it, they might be gone. She considered following on foot, but that would be pointless. The sedan would vanish fast. She climbed down from the pallet and tried another tactic. She crept toward her own car, staying close to walls, moving slowly. The black sedan started its engine, headlights still off. She heard the driver say, "We'll stick to back streets. No one sees nothing." Then the car rolled away, turning down a side street. She cursed under her breath. She couldn't catch them, but at least she knew something. They used certain routes to avoid detection. They dealt in documents describing smuggling paths. She remembered the words border and docks. That meant they moved contraband out of the city, probably by hiding it among normal cargo. The agency would love this info. She reached her own sedan, climbed in, and started the engine quietly. The car rattled as usual. She waited a few minutes, watching the warehouse. The men outside smoked another cigarette, then went back inside. The door slammed shut. The night became quiet again. She pulled away slowly, careful not to draw attention. Once she was a few blocks away, she considered stopping at a payphone to relay some info, but it might be too dangerous right now. She needed a safe spot. The gang was on high alert, and she didn't have a functioning cell phone. She drove through empty streets, glancing in the mirror for any sign of being followed. Nothing. She found a corner store that stayed open late. She parked nearby and pretended to browse a newspaper stand outside. The clerk inside watched her from behind scratched glass. She picked up a cheap calling card and went inside. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Late night?" "Yeah," she said. "Just need to make a call." He grunted. "Payphone's around the corner." She paid for the card and walked around the block to the payphone. She dialed the backup line. It rang twice. A faint voice answered. "I have intel," she said quietly. They confirmed routes, border and docks. Next Tuesday is key. The voice replied, "Good. Need more specifics. Risk a closer look if you can. Time is short." She sighed. "I'll try. I got partial info. Documents delivered tonight. Maybe I can get their exact location tomorrow." The voice said, "No delays?" Then hung up. She slammed the receiver down. No thank you, no acknowledgement of her near-death experiences, just demands. She had what they asked for, yet it still wasn't enough. She shoved her hands in her pockets and returned to the sedan. The streets felt colder now. She started the engine and considered her options. The agency wanted more details. She had seen documents exchanged, had heard the mention of schedules, but no exact address. She would have to try another tactic tomorrow, maybe searching one of their safe houses or following a different contact. For now, she headed back to her cramped room. The car rattled over every bump. Her lips stung again. She kept going, ignoring the pain. Tonight, she had made progress. Tomorrow she would push harder. She parked in the boarding house alley and climbed the stairs quietly. She unlocked her door and sat at the desk, jotting down notes. Documents delivered midnight, mention of border docks route next Tuesday. She underlined next Tuesday. There was no time to lose. She would sleep a few hours and then plan her next move. She had to be careful. The gang was not gentle with strangers. She needed solid evidence the agency couldn't ignore. At least now she had a clue. She flicked off the light and lay down, eyes open, thinking of how to get closer without getting killed. She woke up late in the morning, feeling stiff and hungry. She rubbed her eyes and checked the room. Her radio transmitter was silent, and her phone was still broken. She had a few coins left for payphones, but that was it. She splashed water on her face at the shared bathroom sink and ignored the curious look from a neighbor who passed by. Outside, the sky was overcast, and the streets looked damp. She could smell trash and old cooking oil drifting from a nearby dumpster. She stepped out onto the alley and approached her battered sedan. The taped bumper still held, but barely. The smashed windows made the interior smell like dust and gasoline. She brushed a few glass fragments off the seat and started the engine. It rattled as usual, but it ran. She had to find more details about the contraband routes. The agency wanted exact info, not just vague references. She considered her options. The gang clearly used several warehouses and a network of lookouts. She would try another angle, talk to someone who knew the gang's habits. Maybe one of the small-time shopkeepers or delivery drivers around here could drop a clue. She headed toward a narrow street where she had once seen a mechanic's garage. Maybe someone there had overheard something. When she pulled up, the garage door was half open. A man in greasy coveralls tinkered with an old motorcycle inside. She parked and approached, hands visible, trying not to look threatening. "Hey," she said, "my car's messed up. You fix cars?" The mechanic looked up, squinting. "Sometimes. Depends on what's wrong." She pointed to her sedan. "Got attacked by some thugs. Need a window fix and maybe some help with the alignment." He wiped his hands on a rag. "Rough neighborhood. Who did it?" She shrugged. "A bunch of bikers. Not sure who they were. I'm new around here." He frowned. "Bikers run a lot of these streets. You must have pissed them off." She forced a chuckle. "Maybe I parked in the wrong place. Look, if you can't fix it, at least give me advice on how to stay out of trouble." He snorted. "Advice? Stay invisible. Don't ask questions." She lowered her voice. "Come on, I'm just a delivery driver. I heard these guys move stuff around at night. I don't want to cross their path again." He looked around, then shook his head. "I don't know details, just that they keep to certain routes. They use side streets near the old train tracks and avoid main roads." She nodded. "Train tracks. Thanks. I'll remember that." He sighed. "For your window, I can't help today. Busy. Maybe tomorrow." She nodded and returned to her car, satisfied that she at least had a hint. The train tracks area. That could mean a hidden route connecting the docks, or maybe a path out of the city. She checked her watch. She still had a few days until Tuesday, but the agency wouldn't wait long. She decided to scope out the area near the old train tracks. It took her about 20 minutes to reach that part of town. It was quieter, with abandoned buildings and rusted fences. She parked behind a collapsed billboard and walked on foot, pretending to look for an address. She kept her cap low and her vest zipped up. As she walked, she noticed faint tire marks on the ground and some footprints leading to a locked gate. She peered through the chain-link fence and saw a path leading toward a set of old tracks. The rails looked unused, covered in weeds, but the path alongside them might be a perfect route for smuggling. She checked the fence. It had a loose section at the bottom, bent upward. Someone had been sneaking through here. She took a mental note and moved on. Further down the block, she saw a man unloading crates from an old van. He wore a dirty jacket and seemed nervous. She approached him slowly. "Hey," she said casually, "do you know if there's a shortcut to the docks from here? I'm new in town, trying to find my way." He eyed her suspiciously. "Docks? You don't want to go that way. Nothing there for you." She shrugged. "Just asking. Heard some deliveries go through here." He grunted. "Not for people like you." She smirked. "All right, I get it. I'll leave you alone." She backed away, noting his defensive reaction. She circled the area for a while longer, looking for signs of the gang's presence. She saw a spot where motorcycle tracks cut through a patch of dirt near the fence. It looked fresh. She crouched down and touched the soil. Still moist. They must have come through here recently. As afternoon turned to evening, she decided to contact the agency again from a payphone. She found one near an old pharmacy. The line crackled and she whispered, "Found a possible route by the old tracks. Might lead to the docks. Need more time to confirm details." The voice on the other end was brief. "Hurry, deadline approaches. Confirm exact route and timing." The line went dead. She slammed the receiver down, frustrated. She had a clue, but not the exact schedule or the location where the gang passed through. She needed a plan. If they moved documents and contraband at night, she could try following them from the warehouse area to the tracks. But she would have to be careful not to get caught again. She decided to stake out the train tracks that night. She would hide near the fence and wait for any sign of activity. If the gang moved through, she'd catch them in the act. She stopped at a small store and bought some water and cheap snacks. The owner didn't ask questions. People here knew better. As darkness fell, she parked her sedan a few blocks away and approached the tracks on foot. She wore dark clothes over her vest and kept the cap pulled low. She pressed herself against a wall near the fence, where a broken light offered some cover. She listened to distant traffic and watched for moving lights. After a while, she heard the faint rumble of an engine. She held her breath. It sounded like a motorcycle. Soon, a single headlight appeared at the far end of the path. The bike moved slowly, then stopped near the loose fence section. The rider dismounted and checked the fence, then waved a hand. 2 more bikers arrived, each carrying small boxes strapped to their bikes. She strained to hear their words. One said, "We move it all Tuesday night. This is just a test run." Another replied, "If we don't get caught, we'll use this route again." The first nodded. "The docks at midnight Tuesday, then straight to the border by dawn." She tried to memorize every word. Midnight Tuesday at the docks, then onward to the border. This was the exact info the agency wanted. She glanced down at her wristwatch to confirm the time right now. She saw them rearranging boxes, likely empty containers for testing their drop points. They spoke in low voices, confirming that the tracks offered a quiet passage away from main roads. She decided that was enough for tonight. She had what she needed: the timing, the route, and their plan. She backed away silently, careful not to make noise. A cat hissed nearby, startling her, but she froze until it calmed down. The bikers didn't seem to notice. Once she was a safe distance away, she headed back to her car, watching her surroundings. No one followed. She started the sedan and drove off slowly. No headlights, just drifting through the dark streets until she reached a safer area. She needed to get this info to the agency as soon as possible, but she also had to protect herself. If the gang suspected her, they would come after her again. She found a payphone near a closed bakery. She entered a few coins and dialed the secure line. The voice answered after one ring. She spoke quickly and quietly. "They're moving goods Tuesday at midnight via the tracks to the docks, then heading to the border by dawn. That's their plan." The voice replied, "Understood. Transmit details soon. Prepare to finalize operation." She hung up and leaned her head against the payphone booth. She finally had the concrete intel. Now the agency could act. But that meant she still had to be around, still had to prepare the evidence. She looked at her car, thinking about what would happen next. The agency would want proof, maybe photos or recordings. She had a few nights to set up a final observation. For now, she returned to her cramped room. She locked the door and sat on the mattress. She wrote down the details. Tuesday midnight, docks, then border by dawn. This was the key. She felt a mixture of relief and dread. The biggest step was done, but the last part of the mission would be the hardest. She had to be there on Tuesday night, collect final evidence, and then get out safely. She turned off the light and tried to rest, knowing the next days would be critical. She woke up the next morning feeling sore. She sat up on the thin mattress and listened for noise outside the door. The hallway was quiet. She got dressed slowly, checking her reflection in the cracked mirror. Her lip had healed a bit. but a faint bruise remained. She didn't care. She had more important things to worry about. She had confirmed the gang's plan. Tuesday was only a couple of nights away. She had to be ready. The agency would expect solid proof, not just her word. She needed to gather actual evidence, photos, maybe stolen documents, or anything else that would hold up when they took the gang down. She thought about the previous attempts. Her phone was gone, her car camera useless at long range. She needed a closer look. She went downstairs and stepped outside. It was mid-morning, the sky gray and dull. The smell of fried food drifted from a nearby stall. She grabbed a quick bite, a greasy pastry, and ate it leaning against a wall. Her car waited in the alley, looking more damaged each day. She would need that car to follow the gang on Tuesday night. Maybe she should try the mechanic again, see if he could at least stabilize the car for a decent drive. She finished her snack and climbed behind the wheel. The sedan started on the second try. She drove slowly to the mechanic's place and found him eating his lunch outside. When he saw her sedan, he shook his head. "You again," he said. "Car's still a wreck?" "Yeah," she said. "I need the windows fixed, at least one window, so I'm not so exposed." He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I got an old window that might fit. Not perfect, but better than nothing. It'll cost you." She nodded. "Fine, just make it quick. Also, check the alignment if you can." He grunted and pulled the car into his garage. She stood outside, arms crossed, trying not to look nervous. He worked for about an hour, cursing under his breath. Eventually, he replaced one shattered window with a piece of glass that didn't match perfectly, but at least covered the opening. He tightened a few bolts and looked under the hood. "Alignment's rough, but I made some adjustments," he said. "Don't race it, just drive steady." She paid him in cash. He didn't ask questions. She appreciated that. She drove off, feeling a slight improvement. The car handled a bit better, and at least she wouldn't be sitting in a fully open cab. She spent the rest of the day scouting the neighborhood. She drove past the warehouse areas and near the train tracks again, taking note of any changes. She saw a couple of familiar faces from the gang, one standing near a hardware store, another riding slowly past an old bar. They watched the streets, checking who came and went. In the late afternoon, she returned to the payphone and tried the agency line again. She spoke softly. "I have the schedule. Tuesday midnight, docks, then border. Need confirmation you received." A curt voice answered, "Data confirmed. We expect physical proof, documents, recordings, or direct identification. No delays." The line went dead. She cursed under her breath. Physical proof meant risking getting even closer to these criminals. Maybe she could sneak into their hideout again and snag a piece of paper. Or maybe record their final meeting from a closer vantage point. But her phone was smashed. She needed another device. She thought about the cheap electronics store she passed earlier that week. She drove to the electronics shop, a dingy place with barred windows. Inside, the clerk barely looked at her. He tapped a countertop with restless fingers. "Need something that can record video," she said. "Small and cheap." He shrugged and pointed to a dusty shelf with outdated devices. She found a simple pocket camera, old but functional. It recorded to a small memory card. She tested it quickly in the store. The image was grainy, but might be enough. She paid cash and left without further talk. Back in her room, she tested the camera, aiming it at the dim light and recording a few seconds. It worked. She charged it using a wall socket, then hid it in her vest pocket. She thought about how to approach Tuesday night. The docks were a big area. She needed a vantage point high enough to see their transaction. She remembered an old crane near a storage yard by the waterfront. If she climbed it, she might get a clear view. The night before Tuesday, she tried to get some rest. Sleep came slowly. She listened to rats scurrying in the alley and distant motorcycles humming along distant streets. She knew the gang wouldn't hesitate to kill her if they caught her spying. She had to be careful and quick. She would park her sedan far enough away not to raise suspicion, then move on foot. Tuesday arrived. She spent the day laying low, not risking any moves that would attract attention. In the late afternoon, she checked her car's gas level, just enough for what she needed. As darkness fell, she pulled on her vest, slipped the camera in her pocket, and headed for the docks. She drove with headlights off once she got close, parking in a shadowy spot near a deserted lot. The smell of salt and old fish filled the air. Waves lapped against decaying pilings. She moved quietly along the edge of the docks, hiding behind crates and old cargo containers. She saw a few boats moored in the distance and some weak floodlights near a large warehouse by the water. This must be the place where the gang would meet their contacts. She climbed onto the old crane platform, using a rusted ladder. It took effort, and the metal felt cold and slippery under her gloves. From up there, she had a decent view. She saw a truck and a couple of motorcycles parked near a loading dock. Men stood around, their postures tense. She aimed the camera and pressed record, keeping her breathing steady. She hoped the battery would last long enough. Time passed slowly. She tried not to move too much. Eventually, a black sedan rolled in, headlights off. A figure stepped out and approached the group. Words were exchanged, though she couldn't hear clearly. She zoomed in as best she could. She caught one man holding a clipboard, flipping through papers. Another man opened a crate, revealing what looked like sealed packages. This had to be the contraband. She kept recording, zooming on faces, on license plates, on any detail that could help. They passed documents between them, pointing at the truck, then at the water. She caught the moment a man drew a small map on a piece of paper, showing a route that likely led toward the border. She focused on that paper, praying the camera could capture something legible. Just then, one of the men looked around suspiciously. He seemed to sense something. She held her breath and froze. He scanned the crane area. She stayed still, heart pounding. After a tense moment, he turned back to the group. She exhaled silently. They sealed the deal within minutes. The truck started up, and the motorcycles followed. The sedan left last, trailing behind. She kept recording until everyone was gone. The docks fell silent again. She checked the camera, still running. She stopped the recording and played a bit back. The image was grainy, but clear enough to recognize faces and the items exchanged. This would be her proof. She climbed down the crane carefully, watching her footing. Once on solid ground, she moved fast, avoiding open areas. She reached her sedan, started the engine, and drove away slowly, headlights still off. Only after several blocks did she turn them on, blending into normal traffic. She had what the agency wanted. Now she just needed to deliver it. Back in her room, she locked the door and replayed the footage on the camera's small screen. It showed the gang, the documents, and the route. She took out her radio transmitter and spoke quietly. "I have everything. Clear video of transaction, route confirmed, faces identified." A faint reply. "Good. Send it. Be ready to finalize." She had done her part. The agency would handle the arrests. She felt exhausted, but determined. She organized the details, made sure the memory card was safe, and prepared to hand over the evidence. Tomorrow, she would transmit the data to the agency's secure channel. She had followed every instruction, despite the dangers. She turned off the light, sat in the dark, and let herself relax for a moment. The gang had no idea who she really was. She had stayed quiet, endured their attacks, and gathered the proof. Now it was only a matter of time before the agency moved in. She woke up feeling tense. The final stage of the mission was here. She had a memory card with incriminating footage and a set of notes that tied everything together. She needed to transmit the evidence securely to the agency. Her radio transmitter could send a signal, but she had to be careful. If the gang intercepted it, she would be in danger. Outside, the boarding house hallway was quiet. She stepped out and headed downstairs, keeping her head down. She didn't speak to anyone. She carried her notebook and the camera in her vest, hidden from view. At the end of the alley, she saw a stray cat lurking behind a garbage bin. The sky was overcast and a humid breeze passed through the narrow street. She started her sedan and drove off. The car rattled as usual, but at least it moved. She took a long route around the neighborhood. checking her mirrors for any sign of being followed. So far, no one seemed interested in her. She parked near a small electronics repair shop. According to the agency's instructions, there was a payphone a couple of blocks away that could still tap into a secure line if she used a special code. She got out, locked the car, and walked. The pavement felt uneven under her boots. She passed a few people who didn't even glance at her. A bored guy smoked a cigarette outside a laundromat. She turned the corner and found the payphone she needed. She checked her surroundings before inserting coins. She dialed a number, then entered a code the agency had given her a long time ago. After a series of beeps, a voice came on. "Ready to receive data?" She took a deep breath. "Yes," she said. "I have a memory card with footage. I can describe the content and send a summary now." The voice was calm. "Proceed." She spoke quietly, describing the faces on the video, the route details, the timing, and the nature of the exchange. She explained how the gang planned to hit the border by dawn, how the documents showed hidden trails. She described license plates, the black sedan, the crates, and the papers they handled. She gave every detail she remembered. When she finished, there was a short pause. Then the voice said, "Excellent. We have a team ready to move in. Upload the data to the drop point." She frowned. Upload? Her phone was destroyed, and she only had the camera. "I have a camera with a memory card," she said. "How do I get that data to you?" The voice replied, "Check inside the old phone booth. There's a panel behind the coin return. Open it and insert the card. Hurry." She hung up and looked at the payphone. It seemed ordinary, scratched and dirty. She pried at the coin return flap and found a small hidden slot inside. She took out the memory card from the camera and slid it into the slot. A faint click told her it was accepted. She waited a moment, then heard a dull beep. She pulled the flap shut and stood there, heart pounding. That was it. She had handed over the evidence. Now the agency would have everything they needed. She tapped her foot, uncertain what to do next. The payphone rang. She jumped and picked it up. The voice said, "Data received. Stand by for confirmation. We will neutralize the gang tonight." She nodded, though the voice couldn't see her. "What about me?" she asked. "Am I done?" A brief pause. "Stay put. We'll contact you when it's safe." She hung up and wiped sweat from her forehead. She had done her job. Now it was out of her hands. She left the payphone and walked back to her sedan. On the way, she spotted a familiar face. The shirtless neighbor from the boarding house. He stood at a corner, eyeing her. She tried to look normal and passed by without a word. Back at the car, she sat behind the wheel and considered her next move. The agency had what they needed. The gang would be arrested soon. Her role was basically over. She had infiltrated successfully, gathered intel, recorded the transaction, and delivered the evidence. But part of her worried. Would the gang suspect her before the arrests happened? They had threatened her before. If they saw her around now, they might try something. She decided to lay low in her room until she got word that it was over. She drove back slowly, weaving through quiet streets. She parked in the usual alley and headed upstairs to her tiny room. She locked the door and sat at the desk, hands folded, waiting. Outside, people went about their business. A radio played faint music somewhere. She heard a couple arguing next door. She tried to calm down, telling herself that everything would end soon. Hours passed. She napped lightly, waking to the sound of distant sirens. She pressed her ear against the door. She couldn't tell what was happening outside, but she hoped the agency was making their move. She turned on the radio transmitter and whispered, "Status?" Static for a moment, then a faint reply. "Moving in now. Stand by." She waited, tapping her foot on the floor. More sirens drifted in, then faded. She wondered if the gang was resisting or if they got caught off guard. She pictured them being arrested at their warehouses or on the road to the border, their shipments seized, their documents confiscated. Eventually, the radio crackled again. "Targets secured, operation complete, good work, remain on standby for extraction." She smiled to herself. The gang was done. She had played her part well. She wasn't just a helpless delivery driver. They never knew who she really was. After another hour, the transmitter buzzed. Extraction team en route. Prepare to leave your current location. She gathered her few belongings, a spare shirt, her notebook, and the camera without the memory card. She would abandon this room and never return. It had served its purpose. She stepped outside and locked the door behind her. The hallway was empty. She hurried down the stairs and into the alley. The sedan waited, but she wasn't sure if she would need it. Suddenly, a van rolled up, its windows tinted. The side door slid open, and a figure waved her inside. She climbed in, heart still pounding. The door shut. The driver said nothing. The van pulled away from the alley and merged into light traffic. She didn't ask questions. She recognized the routine. The agency would take her to a safe location, debrief her, and then either assign a new mission or set her free from this job. For the first time in days, she relaxed her shoulders and let out a long breath. She had accomplished what they asked. The gang would face justice, and the routes would be shut down. Now, she could move on. She sat in the back of the van as it moved through quiet streets. The ride was smooth and no one spoke. After a while, they reached a gated complex. Two men in plain clothes checked the van's plates and waved them in. The driver parked near a low, unmarked building. The side door slid open, and one of the men gestured for her to step out. She followed him inside without a word. The hallway smelled of fresh paint and disinfectant. White walls, no windows. They passed a security station where a guard scanned her face and nodded. Another door opened into a small room with a table and two chairs. A dim overhead light hummed softly. "Sit," the man said. She sat and waited. He left, closing the door behind him. She heard muffled voices somewhere outside. The agency liked to keep things low-key. She expected a debrief, then they would let her go. After a few minutes, a different person entered. He wore a plain gray suit, no tie, and carried a thin folder. He sat across from her, opened the folder, and flipped through a few pages without looking at her directly. He tapped the table once. "Good work," he said. His voice was calm. "We have everything we need. The gang's leadership is in custody, and the smuggling routes have been identified. Our field teams are already shutting them down." She nodded, keeping her expression neutral. This was standard procedure. No praise, just facts. He continued, "Your infiltration was successful. You maintained cover, gathered intel, and delivered clear evidence. The mission is complete." "Understood," she said. She studied his face. He didn't show emotion. "Any issues?" he asked, flipping another page. "My phone was destroyed. My car was damaged. I worked without backup at times," she said. "Also, the agency line was often busy. Communication was difficult." He nodded slightly. "This location is sensitive. We had to limit signals. We apologize for the inconvenience." He made a note in the folder. She sat quietly, waiting. He looked up. "We will arrange compensation for your damaged equipment. The car and phone will be reimbursed according to standard rates." He closed the folder. "We also offer a rest period before your next assignment. You can return to your normal life for a while. We'll contact you when we need you again." She blinked, considering his words. "I'd like some downtime," she said. "This job was hard. I had to improvise a lot." He stood. "You did well. A driver outside will take you to a safe location where you can clean up, rest, and recover your documents. After that, you are free to leave the city. We advise you not to remain in this neighborhood. The gang is neutralized, but not everyone was caught. Some members might still be at large." She pushed back her chair and stood. "I understand. I'll be careful." He handed her a small envelope. "Inside is a temporary ID and some cash to get you started. Your regular account will be updated later. We will confirm everything within a few days." She took the envelope and slipped it into her pocket. "Thank you." He nodded and headed toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. "One more thing," he said. "In this line of work, it's best not to dwell on what happened. Just move forward. You showed resourcefulness. Keep that in mind for next time." She gave a short nod. He left, and the door remained open. The man who led her in earlier appeared and signaled for her to follow. She walked behind him through another hallway until they reached a parking area out back. A plain sedan waited with the engine running. The driver was a woman in her 30s with a focused look. The handler said, "She'll take you to a safe house. After that, you're on your own." She got into the sedan's passenger seat and closed the door. The handler stepped back and returned inside. The driver shifted into gear and pulled onto a main road. They traveled in silence. The city passed by. Old buildings, faded signs, normal people doing normal things. She felt a strange relief. The gang was done, and she was free to leave. After about 20 minutes, they parked in front of a small hotel with a faded awning. The driver turned to her. "Room 204, she said, handing over a key. "You have 2 nights prepaid. After that, you're free to go anywhere. No one will bother you." She nodded and exited the car. The driver pulled away without another word. Inside the hotel, the lobby was empty. She climbed 2 flights of stairs and unlocked room 204. It was plain but clean. A bed, a small table, a chair, and a bathroom. She closed the door, locked it, and sat on the bed, exhaling deeply. She reached into her vest and took out her notebook, flipping through the pages of coded notes she had made during the mission. Everything had paid off. She had delivered the intel and survived. The bruise on her lip still reminded her of the danger, but now that felt distant. She pulled off her cap and vest, washed her face in the bathroom sink, and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked tired, but steady. No one would suspect what she had just done. She was just another face in the city. That was the whole point. She dried her face and sat down at the table. The envelope from the agency contained a small stack of bills and an ID with a different name. She recognized the procedure. They always gave a new identity after a big mission in case she needed to vanish. She appreciated the option. At least this time, she could choose what to do next. She turned on the small TV, flipping through channels without interest, just to have some noise in the background. She considered calling her mother. The agency had told her to keep personal contacts minimal during the operation, but now maybe it was possible. She checked the time. Maybe later. First, she wanted to rest. She opened the window slightly. A faint breeze entered the room, carrying distant car horns and muffled conversations from the street below. She leaned back in the chair and let her eyes close for a moment. The operation was over. The gang that terrorized those streets would face justice. The contraband routes would be shut down. All the tension and fear she carried these past days could finally drop away. Tomorrow, she would decide where to go. Maybe a quieter place, maybe a short trip out of the city. With the agency's payment, she could fix her life a bit, handle her debts, maybe do something normal. The future felt uncertain, but at least she was alive and had options. She finished checking her notes one last time, then tore them up and flushed the scraps down the toilet. No trace left behind. That was the rule. She placed the camera, now empty of its memory card, on the bedside table. It was just a device now, no secrets inside. She stretched her legs and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She would sleep now, rest without worrying about who might be waiting outside. The mission was done. She had done what was asked of her, and now she could move on. Nothing else needed to be said.